You want to challenge me to ritual combat? Lieutenant James Rodriguez couldn't help but snort, looking up, way up, at the towering figure of Grand Warlord Cathax of the Zentari Empire. Sir, with all due respect, I'm just a junior officer fresh out of the academy. The massive alien's crystalline epidermis sparkled under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the diplomatic chamber as he let out what might have been either a laugh or a war cry. With Zentari, it was always hard to tell the difference. Precisely why I chose you, human. Cathax's translator rendered his clicking speech into a deep baritone. Your species has developed quite the reputation since joining the Galactic Coalition. I wish to understand what makes you so formidable by testing myself against your most average specimen. James glanced around the room at the assembled diplomats, human and alien alike, all watching this exchange with varying degrees of horror and fascination. Admiral Wong was pinching the bridge of her nose, probably already composing the incident report in her head. Most average specimen. Gee, thanks, James muttered under his breath. Then louder. You do realize that as a representative of the Terran Space Force, accepting such a challenge could be considered an act of... The challenge is sanctioned under Article 7, subsection C of the Coalition Charter regarding cultural exchange and ritual combat. Cathax interrupted, his crystalline form now glowing with an eager orange hue. I have already filed the appropriate paperwork. Of course he had, James thought. The one time an alien warlord actually follows proper procedures, and it's to legally kick my ass. Very well, James said, straightening his uniform. I accept your challenge, Grand Warlord. Though I should warn you, I only graduated middle of my class. The assembled Zentari delegation erupted in their clicking language, their crystalline bodies flickering with what James assumed was either amusement or bloodlust. Again with Zentari, pretty much a coin flip. 3 hours later, James found himself in what the Zentari called their Chamber of Glorious Combat, but what looked suspiciously like a repurposed cargo bay. He'd changed from his dress uniform into the standard-issue TSF combat suit. Sleek black material with subtle blue piping that marked him as a junior officer. Cathax hadn't changed at all, given that Zentari didn't wear clothes. Their crystalline bodies were apparently both their flesh and their armor. The Grand Warlord towered a good 3 meters tall, his entire form an intimidating mass of semi-transparent crystal that shifted between deep purple and fierce orange. The terms are simple, announced the Coalition mediator, a small fuzzy creature that reminded James of a talking tennis ball with eyes. Combat continues until one participant either yields or is rendered unable to continue. No weapons beyond natural biology or standard-issue equipment. No assistance from outside parties, no... Yeah, we get it, James interrupted, bouncing on his toes to work out his nervous energy. Don't cheat. Fight fair. Try not to cause an interstellar incident. Can we get on with it? The mediator huffed, its fur bristling. Very well. Combat begins in 3, 2, 1, engage! Court-martialed? Good God, no. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Admiral pulled up a holoscreen showing various news feeds. You've just become a galactic sensation. Human junior officer defeats Zentari warlord with survival gear. David versus Goliath, a modern space opera. Coalition's newest species proves worth through clever combat. James felt his stomach sink. Ma'am, I really didn't mean to cause an incident. Incident? Rodriguez, you've just done more for human-Zentari relations than 6 months of diplomatic meetings. Cathax has formally requested that you be assigned as his cultural liaison. Apparently, he's fascinated by our warrior-scholar approach to combat. But I'm not a warrior-scholar. I'm barely a warrior, or a scholar. Which is exactly why this works so perfectly, Admiral Wong said, her smile growing wider. You demonstrated everything that makes humans unique in the Coalition. Not overwhelming strength or advanced technology, but our ability to take basic knowledge, common tools, and turn them into solutions nobody else would think of. She leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. The Zentari respect strength, yes, but what they truly value is the ability to see patterns others miss. By defeating Cathax through observation and adaptation rather than brute force, you've earned their genuine admiration. Do you know how rare that is? James slumped in his chair. So, what happens now? Now? Now you're going to spend the next 6 months teaching Cathax and his warriors about human problem-solving approaches while they teach you advanced crystalline combat techniques. Consider it a cultural exchange program. 6 months? With the Zentari? James thought about Cathax's earlier crystal blade demonstration. Will I survive that long? Admiral Wong's smile turned slightly wicked. Probably. Though I suggest you stock up on thermal blankets, just in case. 3 months later, James found himself sharing what the Zentari considered tea. It was actually liquid crystal that humans couldn't drink, with Cathax, discussing the finer points of human innovation. "But I still do not understand," Cathax said, his crystalline form now a peaceful blue shade that James had learned indicated deep thought. "If your thermal blankets were so effective against our crystal manipulation, why has no other species thought to use them?" James sipped his very human coffee. Probably because they were too focused on finding a way to break your crystal structure rather than disrupt it. Sometimes the best solution isn't about matching strength with strength. Yes, your human saying. Work smarter, not harder. Cathax's translator managed to make even this sound dramatic. "Though I notice you humans often do both simultaneously." "Yeah, we're funny like that," James grinned. "Speaking of which, ready to try that new training exercise I designed?" Cathax's color shifted to eager orange. "The one involving the magnetic field generators and the rubber balls. Most unusual indeed." As they headed to the training chamber, James couldn't help but reflect on how strange his life had become. Cathax immediately launched himself forward with surprising speed for something made of crystal, his right arm morphing into a wickedly sharp blade. James had just enough time to think, "Well, that's just unfair," before diving into a roll. The blade whistled through the air where his head had been moments before. James came up running, his combat suit's servos whining as they assisted his movement. He needed distance. Distance was good. Distance meant a crystalline spike erupted from the floor directly in his path. "Oh, right," James remembered as he barely twisted away from impalement. "Zentari can extend their crystal structure through any similar mineral surface, like, say, the metal floor of a cargo bay." "Excellent reflexes!" Cathax boomed, his voice echoing off the walls as more crystal spikes began sprouting in James's path. "But merely avoiding death will not win you victory, human." "Thanks for the tactical advice," James called back, vaulting over a particularly nasty cluster of crystals. "Any other tips you'd like to share? Maybe your preferred weak spots?" The warlord's answering laugh was definitely more war cry than amusement this time. "We Zentari have no weak spots. We are perfect crystalline beings, forged in the— What are you doing?" What James was doing, specifically, was running straight up the wall. The combat suit's gecko grip soles, combined with its servo-assisted strength, made vertical surfaces just another path to exploit. He'd learned that particular trick from his zero-G combat instructor, right before she'd kicked his ass 6 ways from Sunday. "Oh, James called down as he reached the ceiling, now running inverted. "Just trying to get a different perspective on things. You should try it sometime." Cathax's crystal spikes couldn't follow him up the treated ceramic walls. Different mineral structure. The warlord was forced to track him by turning his head almost completely backward, which looked incredibly disturbing on a crystalline being. "Amusing," Cathax growled. "But you cannot stay up there forever. Your suit's power supply must have limits." "True," James admitted, then grinned. "But I don't need forever." He'd made a complete circuit of the ceiling now, and more importantly, he'd had time to observe. Cathax's crystalline body might not have traditional weak points, but it did have something just as useful. Predictable patterns. The way his crystal structure flowed and shifted followed consistent rules of mineral formation. Rules that James had spent 6 mind-numbing months studying in Xenobiology 201. Finally, he thought, those all-nighters are going to pay off. James kicked off the ceiling just as his suit's power reserves dipped into the red. He fell straight toward Cathax, who raised both arms in anticipation of either catching or skewering him. But at the last moment, James triggered his suit's emergency compressed air system, designed for zero-G maneuvering, and shot sideways instead. He landed in a roll directly on top of one of Cathax's earlier crystal spikes, which was exactly where he wanted to be. The warlord spun to face him, already extending more crystalline weapons, but James was ready. From his belt, he pulled out his emergency thermal blanket, standard issue for survival situations, and threw it over the spike he was standing on. The silvery material settled just as Cathax's new growth reached it. The warlord's crystal structure, attempting to extend through what it thought was bare metal floor, instead hit the insulated barrier of the thermal blanket. The disruption shot back through Cathax's mineral matrix like a crack through ice. His entire form shuddered, crystal patterns fracturing and reforming in chaotic ways. What did you do?" Cathax's voice oscillated wildly as his body tried to compensate. "Fun fact about Zentari crystal formation," James said, casually leaning against the spike he'd just weaponized. "It relies heavily on thermal conductivity for proper growth patterns. Disrupt that conductivity at a key point, and well, he gestured at Cathax's still shuddering form. Let's just say it's like giving a crystal being a really bad case of hiccups. This is most irregular. Cathax's color shifted rapidly between orange and purple, and several shades James didn't have names for. The warlord tried to take a step forward and nearly fell over as his leg partially crystallized in the wrong direction. You know what else is irregular? James asked, pulling out a second thermal blanket. Challenging a junior officer to ritual combat just to prove a point about humans. I mean, really? You couldn't have just asked us out for coffee like a normal person? Cathax's crystalline form was now doing something that looked uncomfortably like melting and reforming at random intervals. I yield to the human's superior understanding of basic xenobiology and creative use of survival gear, James suggested helpfully. That, Cathax managed before his translator gave out entirely, reducing him to clicks and crystal chimes that James chose to interpret as swearing. The fuzzy mediator bounced back into the chamber, somehow managing to look both impressed and annoyed. Combat is concluded. The human Lieutenant Rodriguez is declared victor by submission. This will be recorded in the Coalition archives as a formal victory for the Terran Space Force over the Centauri Empire in ritual combat. Oh, God, James groaned, suddenly realizing the diplomatic implications. Admiral Wong is going to kill me. Let me get this straight, Admiral Wong said later, staring at James across her desk. You defeated one of the most feared warriors in the Coalition, using emergency thermal blankets? Yes, ma'am, James replied, standing at attention and trying not to fidget. And a basic understanding of crystalline growth patterns from Xenobiology 201. The same class you nearly failed? I got a C+, ma'am, through extensive tutoring and creative interpretation of the grading curve. The Admiral was silent for a long moment, and James prepared himself for the end of his very brief military career. Then he noticed her shoulders shaking slightly. She was laughing. Oh, sit down, Rodriguez, she managed between chuckles, before you sprain something trying to look professional. James practically collapsed into the chair, relief washing over him. So, I'm not being court-martialed? Here he was, teaching alien warriors how to think more creatively by basically introducing them to human playground games, modified for crystal beings. And somehow it was working. The Centauri were already developing new techniques based on his seemingly ridiculous suggestions. Last week, one of Cathax's junior warriors had managed to incorporate rubber-like flexibility into their crystal structure, something previously thought impossible. All because I happened to remember some basic facts from a class I barely passed, James thought. Maybe that's really what makes humans special in the galaxy. Not that we're naturally brilliant or powerful, but that we're really good at turning our mediocrity into advantage. You are thinking deep thoughts, Cathax observed as they walked. Your species' expression becomes very specific when contemplating the universe. Just thinking about how I ended up here, James replied. You know, when you first challenged me to combat, I thought you were just being a bully. Cathax's crystal form chimed with amusement, and I thought you were just being insolent. We were both right in our own ways, but we were also both wrong. Yeah, James laughed. Funny how that works out. They reached the training chamber, where several Centauri warriors were already waiting, their crystal forms shifting with anticipation. All right, everyone, James called out, pulling out what appeared to be a modified dodgeball. Today we're going to learn about the ancient and honorable human tradition of mixing things up and seeing what happens. First rule of the game: there are no rules except the ones we make up as we go along. The Centauri warriors looked at each other in confusion while Cathax's translator struggled to convey the concept. James grinned. This was going to be fun. And to think, he mused as he started explaining his latest crazy training idea. All of this started because I didn't want to get stabbed by a crystal alien. Sometimes the best diplomatic solutions really do come from just trying not to die in creative ways. The universe, James had learned, had a sense of humor after all. It just happened to be as weird as humans were. Incoming! James shouted as he dove behind a crystalline barrier, narrowly avoiding what appeared to be a gelatinous projectile traveling at approximately half the speed of common sense. Cathax's resonant laugh echoed through the training chamber. You see? We too can adapt your human concepts of mixing things up, Lieutenant Rodriguez. The barrier behind James began to vibrate ominously. He quickly rolled to another position, just as his previous shelter transformed into a series of crystalline tentacles that tried to gently, by Centauri standards, restrain him. You know, he called out, when I suggested combining your crystal manipulation with other materials, I didn't exactly mean, whoa. He cut off as another gelatinous blob sailed overhead, this one sparkling with embedded crystal fragments. The resulting splatter pattern on the wall behind him formed what looked suspiciously like a smiley face. "Too predictable," Cathax announced proudly. "You humans have taught us the value of, as you say, thinking outside the box. Though I still do not understand why thinking requires a box in the first place." James couldn't help but laugh as he activated his combat suit's enhanced mobility features. The Zentari had insisted on upgrading it with some of their crystal technology, making it both more durable and somehow sassier. The suit now occasionally made disapproving beeps when he attempted particularly ridiculous maneuvers. Like now, for instance, as he ran straight up a wall and backflipped over Cathax's position. The suit beeped what he'd come to recognize as its "I can't believe you're doing this again" tone. "Oh, hush," he told it, landing in a roll. "You love it." The past 3 months had transformed the once formal training sessions into something that looked more like a cross between advanced combat training and a deranged physics experiment. The Zentari, it turned out, had an absolutely incredible capacity for creative adaptation once they got past their initial rigid thinking patterns. Maybe a little too incredible, James reflected as he watched one of Cathax's junior warriors demonstrate their latest innovation. Rapidly switching between crystalline and partially liquid states to flow around obstacles while maintaining combat effectiveness. "That's both amazing and slightly disturbing," James commented as the warrior reformed into their usual crystalline shape. "How did you even figure out how to do that?" The warrior's translation crystal chimed with pride. "I observed the movement of your human chocolate milkshake and wondered if we could apply similar fluid dynamics to our own forms." James blinked. You revolutionized Zentari combat capabilities by watching me drink a milkshake?" "Indeed," Cathax interjected, his crystal form glowing with what James had learned was their equivalent of a proud smile. "Your species' tendency to consume partially solid, partially liquid sustenance led to quite the breakthrough in our understanding of matter states." "Wait until they discover ice cream," muttered James, making a mental note to never introduce the Zentari to non-Newtonian fluids. The galaxy probably wasn't ready for that level of chaos. The training chamber's door slid open, revealing Admiral Wong accompanied by what appeared to be a delegation of very important-looking aliens. James immediately recognized the distinctive shimmer of the Zentari High Council members, along with representatives from at least 3 other coalition species. "Don't let us interrupt," the Admiral said, though her expression suggested that interrupting was exactly what they were doing. "We're just here to observe the cultural exchange program's progress." James looked around the chamber, taking in the crystalline obstacle course covered in gelatinous splatter patterns, the half-liquefied Zentari warriors practicing new combat forms, and his own combat suit, which was currently flashing warning lights about excessive creative interpretation of physical laws. "Ah," he said intelligently. Cathax, bless his crystalline heart, simply brightened to his most formal orange hue. "Honored council members, you arrive at the perfect moment. We were just demonstrating our integration of human tactical flexibility with traditional Zentari combat forms." One of the council members stepped forward, their crystal structure so intricately formed that it seemed to catch and reflect light in impossible ways. "We have been monitoring your progress," they said, their translator rendering their voice in tones of carefully measured neutrality. "Oh great," James thought. "This is where they tell us we've been making a mockery of their ancient and honorable combat traditions. Your innovations," the council member continued, "are unprecedented in our species' history. Here it comes. We wish to expand the program." "I understand completely and wait, what?" James stumbled over his own words as his brain caught up with what he'd just heard. Admiral Wong's smile had that particular quality that meant someone was about to have a lot more responsibility dumped on them. "The Coalition Council has expressed great interest in your unique approach to cross-species combat training, Lieutenant, particularly in how it promotes both tactical innovation and cultural understanding. The ability to adapt and incorporate foreign concepts while maintaining one's core identity," the Zentari Council member added, "is a skill we had not previously recognized the value of. Your human perspective has proven most illuminating." Cathax's crystal form was practically vibrating with excitement. "They wish us to establish a formal training academy, James. One where warriors of all species can learn to think beyond their traditional limitations." James looked at the Admiral. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not qualified to create an entirely new form of multi-species combat training by accidentally applying basic physics and human ingenuity to alien biology," Admiral Wong interrupted. because I'd say you've already done exactly that. But Lieutenant Rodriguez, the council member's translator, somehow managed to convey both amusement and authority. Qualifications are determined by results, not prior expectations. Your human educational system's concept of grading on a curve has proven most applicable here. James couldn't help but laugh at that. So you're saying I passed alien combat instructor training on a curve? More accurately, Cathax said, you demonstrated that the curve itself needed re-evaluation. Much like how you showed us that crystal formation doesn't always need to follow linear patterns. Speaking of patterns, Admiral Wong interjected, the Coalition Council has already approved the funding and facilities for this new academy. They're particularly interested in your ideas about applying human game theory to combat training. James thought about the modified dodgeball game he'd introduced last week, which had somehow evolved into a complex training exercise in predictive movement and adaptive defense. You mean they want more of this? He gestured at the chaos around them. Precisely. The council member's crystal form shifted to a shade James had never seen before, something between excited purple and scholarly blue. Your human ability to derive complex training methodologies from simple recreational activities is most intriguing. We believe other species could benefit from this approach. Plus, Cathax added, no one has died yet, which is a significant improvement over traditional Zentari training methods. Always a bonus, James agreed weakly. Admiral Wong stepped forward, her expression becoming more serious. The real question, Lieutenant, is whether you're willing to take on this responsibility. This isn't just about training anymore. You'll be helping shape the future of Coalition combat doctrine. James looked around the chamber again, but this time he saw more than just the chaos of their training session. He saw the Zentari warriors experimenting freely with new forms, unbound by traditional limitations. He saw the pride in Cathax's crystalline stance as he demonstrated techniques that would have been impossible 3 months ago. Most importantly, he saw the potential for something greater than just combat training. This was about breaking down barriers between species, about showing that different approaches could complement rather than conflict with each other. Well, he said finally, I did always want to make a difference in the galaxy. I just thought it would involve more heroic space battles, and less explaining why capture the flag is actually a complex exercise in strategic thinking. The Admiral's smile widened. Sometimes the most important victories don't involve any fighting at all. Indeed, Cathax agreed, placing one crystalline hand on James's shoulder. Though I must ask, what is this paintball concept you mentioned last week? The Council is most curious about its potential applications. James looked at the Admiral, who was already shaking her head. No paintball, she said firmly. At least not until after the Academy is properly established. But that's an order, Lieutenant. Yes, ma'am. James sighed, then brightened. What about laser tag? The Zentari Council member's translator made a sound suspiciously like a snort. Perhaps we should focus on establishing the Academy's basic curriculum first. Of course, James agreed, already mentally designing training exercises that technically weren't paintball but would achieve similar results. Maybe something with those color-changing crystal formations Cathax had been experimenting with. As the delegation began discussing logistics, James couldn't help but marvel at how far things had come from that first combat challenge. He'd gone from trying not to get skewered by a crystal alien to helping revolutionize Coalition combat training, all because he remembered some basic science facts and wasn't afraid to look silly trying new things. Maybe that's the real lesson here, he thought. Sometimes the best way to change the galaxy isn't through grand gestures or epic battles, but through being willing to try something different and not taking yourself too seriously while doing it. James, Cathax called, interrupting his thoughts. The Council wishes to know if you have any immediate suggestions for the Academy's first training modules. James grinned. Well, there's this human game called Red Light, Green Light. The Admiral's groan was barely audible over the sound of crystal beings leaning forward with interest. Yep, James thought, the galaxy is definitely not ready for this. But it's going to be fun finding out what happens anyway. The newly established Coalition Combat Innovation Academy occupied an entire orbital station around a nondescript gas giant in neutral space. Its gleaming corridors, reinforced training chambers, and state-of-the-art facilities represented the finest technological collaboration between member species. Lieutenant James Rodriguez stood at the observation window of his office, watching distant ships approach with the first class of students. The station's crystal-infused architecture, a gift from the Zentari, caught the light of the system's binary stars, creating ever-shifting patterns across the walls. Contemplating the magnitude of our undertaking? Cathax asked, his crystalline form reflecting the same celestial light show. Actually, I was wondering how we're going to explain dodgeball to a hive mind collective, James replied. The Arcer consciousness signed up an entire neural cluster for training. How do you play team sports when all your opponents share the same thoughts? A fascinating tactical challenge, Cathax observed. Perhaps we should consult Admiral Wong. She's still mad about the laser tag incident. The repair crews assured us the scorch marks were purely cosmetic. It's not the scorch marks she's worried about. It's the fact that the Zentari warriors figured out how to redirect the laser beams using their crystal forms. The equipment manufacturers are still sending strongly worded complaints about unanticipated use of gaming systems. Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle chime from the station's AI. Pardon the interruption, Lieutenant Rodriguez, Grand Warlord Cathax. The first transport has docked. The diplomatic delegation requests your presence in the welcome chamber. James straightened his uniform, a new design that incorporated both traditional Terran Space Force elements and Zentari crystal accents. Well, time to face the music. Ready to make history? I believe the human phrase is, ready as I'll ever be. The welcome chamber was a massive space designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and environmental needs. James and Cathax entered to find an assemblage of creatures that looked like a fever dream of evolutionary possibility. Towering methane breathers from the gas giant colonies stood near compact high-gravity worlders. A group of photosynthetic beings had already clustered near the artificial sunlight ports. The Arzer neural cluster occupied an entire corner, its crystalline housing unit pulsing with complex thought patterns. Welcome, James began, his words being translated into 17 different languages simultaneously. To the first class of the Coalition Combat Innovation Academy. You're here because your respective governments believe you can help reshape how we approach combat training and species cooperation. He paused, looking over the assembled beings. You're also here because traditional methods haven't worked for you. Maybe you're considered unconventional by your species' standards. Maybe you've struggled with classical combat forms. Maybe you've got weird ideas that no one takes seriously. A ripple of movement passed through the crowd, the equivalent of uncomfortable shifting among dozens of different physiologies. Good, James continued. That's exactly what we're looking for. Because this academy isn't about teaching you to fight like everyone else. It's about teaching you to fight like yourself, while learning from how everyone else thinks. Cathax stepped forward, his crystal form shifting to a commanding orange hue. When Lieutenant Rodriguez first defeated me in ritual combat, he did so not through superior strength or advanced technology, but through understanding and adaptation. That is what we aim to cultivate here. A tentacled being near the front raised an appendage. Is it true you used thermal blankets to disrupt Zentari crystal formation? That seems improbable. Improbable is our specialty, James grinned. In fact, our first exercise will demonstrate exactly that. Everyone please proceed to Training Chamber 1, where we've prepared what humans call a scavenger hunt, but with some modifications for combat application. The assembled beings began moving toward the designated chamber, some floating, others walking, a few rolling or slithering. James and Cathax followed behind. You didn't tell them about the obstacle course elements, Cathax observed. Or the team-building challenges, James agreed. Or the fact that they'll have to figure out how to cooperate across species barriers to complete the tasks. Most devious. You're becoming quite proficient at educational subterfuge. I prefer to think of it as strategic revelation of information. The training chamber doors opened to reveal what looked like a cross between a military obstacle course, a puzzle room, and something from a children's playground. The students' reactions ranged from confusion to alarm to what James hoped was excitement. It was hard to tell with some species. Your first task, James announced, is simple. Each team must get at least one member to the other side of the chamber. The catch is, each section of the course is designed to be impossible for certain physiologies, but perfect for others. You'll have to figure out how to combine your abilities to succeed. A crystalline being similar to Cathax raised a faceted appendage. This seems unorthodox. Orthodoxy is overrated, Cathax replied. Lieutenant, shall we demonstrate? James nodded and stepped forward with Cathax. What followed was a precisely choreographed demonstration of their newest training innovation, the crystal-enhanced combat suit, allowing James to literally merge with Cathax's crystalline form for enhanced mobility and protection. The assembled students watched in stunned silence as human and Zentari moved as one entity, flowing through obstacles that should have been impossible for either species alone. When they separated again, James couldn't help but smile at the mixture of shock and intrigue on the various alien faces, those that had recognizable faces anyway. That, he said, is what happens when you stop thinking about species differences as limitations and start thinking about them as opportunities. Now who's ready to try something new? The next few hours were chaos of the finest kind. James watched as beings who had never worked together, some from traditionally hostile species, gradually began to figure out how to combine their unique abilities. The methane breathers used their natural buoyancy to lift smaller species over barriers. The high-gravity worlders provided anchor points for climbing species. The arcs or neural cluster, in a moment of brilliant adaptation, figured out how to temporarily share its processing power with organic beings to enhance their reaction times. "They're learning faster than we anticipated," Cathax observed as they watched a particularly creative solution involving 3 different species, creating an impromptu living bridge. "They just needed permission to think differently," James replied. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't learning new things. It's unlearning our assumptions about what's possible." A crash from the far end of the chamber drew their attention. One team had apparently discovered that the photosynthetic beings could temporarily boost their energy output to create organic light bridges for others to cross gaps. "Should we tell them about the second level?" Cathax asked. James watched as the various teams began spontaneously sharing their discoveries with each other, breaking down the initial species barriers in their excitement to try new combinations. "Let them figure this out first. They're learning something more important than just solving the course." "Oh?" "They're learning that the real victory isn't in being the first to finish. It's in helping everyone find their own way to succeed." Cathax's crystal form shifted to that scholarly blue shade. "A most human perspective. Though I notice you've still programmed the course to record completion times." "Hey, a little friendly competition never hurt anyone. The repair crews might disagree." Before James could respond, the station's AI chimed again. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, Admiral Wong is requesting an update on the first day's progress. She specifically asked about the structural integrity of the station." James sighed. "Tell her all critical systems are functioning normally and—" A loud cheer interrupted him as one team discovered they could use the neural cluster's crystalline housing to refract the photosynthetic being's light bridges in multiple directions at once. "And," the AI prompted, "and we're advancing the cause of interspecies cooperation through carefully controlled chaos," James finished. "Also, we might need some minor repairs in Training Chamber 1, emphasis on minor." Cathax's crystal form chimed with amusement. "Shall I begin drafting the requisition forms?" "Probably a good idea. But first—" James watched as the various teams began to naturally reorganize, species mixing and matching abilities in increasingly creative ways. "I think we should let them finish discovering just how many impossible things they can do together." The Academy's first day was far from over, and already James could see the beginnings of something remarkable. Not just in the way the different species were learning to work together, but in how they were starting to see their differences as advantages rather than obstacles. "Not bad," he thought, "for something that started with a combat challenge and some thermal blankets." "They're going to change the galaxy, aren't they?" Cathax asked quietly. James watched as a methane breather carefully lifted a photosynthetic being into position to create a light bridge for a high-gravity worlder, while the neural cluster provided real-time calculations for optimal positioning. "No," he replied. "They're going to show the galaxy it was capable of changing all along. They just needed someone to remind them that impossible is just another word for hasn't been tried yet." Another crash echoed through the chamber, followed by excited multi-species chatter about new possibilities. "Though maybe," James added, "we should reinforce the training chambers first." Cathax's crystal form flickered with what had become his equivalent of a laugh. "I'll add it to the requisition forms. End."